Throughout America's history, her valiant men and women have gathered arms to protect our nation's liberty. They have given their blood, limbs, and very lives in the cause of freedom. These are their stories in their own words of what they witnessed and suffered. These are warriors' tales. 17-year-old Keith Davis from a small town in Utah, along with hundreds of thousands of other young American men, were drafted or volunteered to serve in the Army. After basic training, Private Davis was sent to England to prepare for what was going to be the largest and bloodiest invasion ever held.
In June 1943, I graduated from Springville High School, and then I was drafted in the Army. I was out for about 3 days, and then I was sent to Fort Douglas, Utah. At Fort Douglas, we were there just a few days. We got our clothing and our supplies, and we were assigned different places. So from Fort Douglas, they sent me to Camp Roberts, California, and I took my basic training in Camp Roberts, California. We're sent to Camp Shanks, New York, and from Camp Shanks, New York, we departed for Europe on the ship. We went down the ramp to the ships. The Queen Mary was waiting on there was a big dock between the Queen Mary and the little ship, the Louis Pasteur. It was a little French ship. And we was marching down to board the ship. We was thinking we was going to go on the Queen Mary because it was a big ship. It was on the left side of the ramp, and when we got down to the two ships, they said column right, and we got on board the Louis Pasteur. The Queen Mary took 5,000 troops at a time, but the Louis Pasteur was only big enough to take 500. So we got on the Louis Pasteur, and that was a French ship. We started across the ocean, and we zigzagged every 7 seconds. If there were submarines in the area, why, we zigzagged so they couldn't catch us so easy. And we docked at Liverpool, England. And we saw pictures where the Americans docked, and they had a band there and cheering people. But when we docked at Liverpool, there was not a person on the dock. So we departed the Louis Pasteur, and we got into trucks, and we went to an army camp in England. The army camp was named Leopold, and we were in England for quite a while.
D-Day, June 6th, 1944. American GIs invaded Normandy, located on the northern coast of France. The Normandy invasion began with overnight parachute and glider landings, massive air attacks, and naval bombardments. Early the next morning, the amphibious landings began. By late July, over 1 million troops had landed in France, and the Allies had suffered 120,000 casualties. 4,400 Allied soldiers died on D-Day alone.
We boarded the ship. We was there for 4 days and 3 nights. The time we was there was thousands of airplanes flying overhead, day and night. There was American B-17s, American fighter planes, P-51s, P-38s, P-47s, English Lancaster bombers, and English Spitfire fighter planes. They were all headed for the coast of France to raise havoc on the beaches and behind the big shore batteries. The B-17s were flying farther into Germany to bomb ball bearing factories and rail yards and ammunition factories, and there was airplanes as far as you could see. The water was being churned up by hundreds and hundreds of ships and boats, everything from tugboats to cruisers. These ships were taking the troops over to the 5 beaches in Normandy. And then some of the ships were bringing casualties back from the 5 beaches so they could be treated in American and English hospitals. There were ships as far as you could see. We departed from Southampton and crossed the English Channel, and we anchored at Utah Beach. When we anchored at Utah Beach, we looked to our left, we could see Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach was still being fired on, heavy fire. We could see the black flak exploding over the ships and the sandy beach below, raining shrapnel tower on the troops on the ships and the sandy beach. It was a horrible sight. We went over the side of our ship on huge cargo nets. We had our backpacks on, our rifles over our shoulder, and our gas mask over our shoulder. We climbed down these huge rope ladders and we got into landing craft. We went ashore on, we was in the area of St. Mary Lease. This is the area where the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne, thousands of paratroopers parachuted in this area on June the 5th, 1944, so they could raise havoc behind the German lines of the big shore batteries. And they jumped in total darkness. When they jumped, some of them landed in swampy areas, some of them landed, and they were bogged down. Some of them landed among German garrisons, and they were killed immediately. And many of them were dead before they hit the ground. But thousands of them landed safely. From there, we fought our way through the fields and the hedgerows. And I had a friend named Unger, and we was going through some war debris. We were on foot right now. We was going through some war debris, and my friend picked up a Nazi helmet. He looked inside this helmet, and the letters were stenciled, UNGER. He looked at me and he said, "I'm going to be fighting my own family over here." We fought in some more fields and hedgerows, and sometimes we'd come upon a group of older French men and women. And these French men and women had young girls. They were surrounded, these young girls. What they were doing, they were cutting their hair off so they'd be bald-headed. The reason they did this is because these girls had fraternized with the Nazi soldiers when they occupied this area. So every time we seen a bald-headed young girl, we knew she had fraternized with the German soldiers. From here we fought our way up the coast to Brest, France. Brest, France at that time was the largest submarine base in the world. It was where the Nazi submarine wolf packs went into the Atlantic Ocean and sank millions and millions of tons of Allied shipping. And thousands of merchant marines, Army, Navy, and civilians went down with these ships. There was a huge menace to the war effort. These submarine wolf packs, they really destroyed a lot of incoming material to England and Europe. Our artillery fired on this base from the ground, and the Navy shelled it from the sea, and the Air Force bombed it from the air. And after much firepower, the submarine base capitulated. It surrendered. I was in the 16th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. We were the eyes and ears of the field artillery. We was always on the front line and most of the time in head of the infantry. From Brest, France, we fought our way to St. Lo. St. Lo is quite a large city. And when we got to St. Lo, the place was really bombed and there was not much standing. We had tank duels at St. Lo, artillery duels, and much hand-to-hand fighting. The FFI fought alongside of us at St. Lo. The FFI is the Free French of the Interior. The FFI was made up of young boys and old men, and they fought alongside of us. And I got acquainted with two of the FFI young boys, and we were together for about 3 days, and then I never saw them again. Hitler, he ordered his generals to burn Paris to the ground, but his generals refused and they didn't burn Paris to the ground. When we got to Paris, there was a few snipers left in the second story windows in the alleyways, but we soon took care of them. The whole army in our sector went through Paris in convoy. They let Charles de Gaulle go through Paris first because he was commanding the French army. They wanted him to have the honors of going through Paris first. As we was going through Paris, the boulevards were wide, and there was Parisians. There was thousands of Parisians on each side of the boulevards. They were waving little American and French flags as we went by. And when the convoy stopped, why, the Parisians swarmed all over our tanks and our half-tracks, our command cars and our jeeps. And the girls were kissing the GIs, and there was much cognac. It was a happy time in Paris because the Parisians had been under German rule for so many years. After Paris, we fought our way up through more of France, and we fought our way to Luxembourg, through Luxembourg, and we fought our way into Belgium, and we fought our way to the German-Belgian border. We was at a place called Au, Germany, A-U-W. There was no town or anything there. It was just forest. We were in the Hürtgen Forest in the Sneifel Mountains, and winter was setting in, and we didn't have any winter clothing. The Germans would send their buzz bombs over us, over the front line. A buzz bomb's a pilotless plane filled with flammable liquids and much shrapnel. And they made a loud noise, and they flew real low and slow. As long as you could hear the motor, you knew you was safe. But as soon as the motor stopped, the buzz bomb would dive into the ground within seconds. It'd leave a huge hole in the ground, and it would throw flammable liquids and shrapnel for hundreds of yards. We had 3 of them land pretty close to us, but we didn't have any of our outfit injured by the buzz bombs.
The Battle of the Bulge was the last major German offensive campaign during World War II. It was launched through the densely forested regions of Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. The surprise attack caught the Allied forces completely off guard. American forces bore the brunt of the attack and incurred their highest casualties of any operation during the war.
The winter was setting in now, and it was getting foggy, and the cloud cover was really thick. And Nazi German General von Rundstedt made a counterattack on a 50-mile front, on this foggy front. He came through with the 5th Panzer Army, the 6th Panzer Army, and the 7th German Army. And he comes through with thousands and thousands of infantry troops dressed in white. Most of them were dressed in white for camouflage in the snow. And they really slaughtered us. They pushed us back to Bastogne. Bastogne is a larger city in Belgium. German tanks circling the city, and artillery guns circling the city, and they fired continuously without let-up for days on end. The Nazi high command sent a courier. He come in a German Jeep. He had a white flag and a German driver. He didn't have any weapons. He come up to the lines, the American lines in there, and he was escorted to our General McAuliffe, and they handed him a message, and the message in essence says, "Surrender, all your troops or be annihilated." And General McAuliffe, he took a piece of paper and a pencil, and he wrote the word "nuts" on this paper, and he gave it to the courier, and the courier was escorted back to the German lines, and he handed it back to the high command, German high command, and they couldn't understand the word "nuts." They didn't know what it meant, but this was meant, in no way will we surrender. So this infuriated the German generals, so they really poured on the firepower. The firepower was more intense than when we first got there. And somehow our one battery escaped the circle. We was on the outside of Bastogne. The snow was deep, and we was on the outside, but we were still There was still machine guns firing and artillery firing, but we didn't, we were out of range or something. They just didn't hit us. There was 3 of us from this OP observation post. We found a Belgian farmhouse. It was just outside of Bastogne. We went in this farmhouse. There was a man and a lady and a little boy and little girl about 6 or 7 years old. This was Christmas Eve when we went in here, and the lady, she gave us some soup and some black bread. We had a few pieces of candy in our pockets we carried, and we give it to them. Anyway, we stayed in this farmhouse that night. We were soaking wet when we went in, and really cold. Anyway, we got dried out, and this was Christmas Eve, so we sang Christmas songs with this family that night. We sang Jingle Bells and Silent Night. The words were different, but the music was the same. We was there for the full night. We could hear the machine guns rattling and the artillery shells bursting all around us, but this house never got hit for some reason. The next morning, we had to leave to find our outfit. And this family didn't want to see us go. Our 16th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was badly shot up. So the 285th Field Artillery Observation was badly shot up in the same area. The 2 observation battalions decided to combine and make 1 observation battalion so we could be more effective in the war. But this never happened. The Nazi SS troops, they captured 1 battery of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. They took them out on a snowy field and machine gunned the whole battery. This wasn't war, this was murder. This was called the Normandy massacre. The Germans, after they machine gunned these Americans, they went through they walked through the bodies with their pistols, and if they seen a motion or a scream, they would shoot these people in the head. There was two Americans that played dead, and they survived this Normandy massacre.
The death camp at Ohrdruf, Germany was created in late 1944. As the American troops advanced towards Ohrdruf, the SS began evacuating almost all the prisoners on death marches to Buchenwald. The SS guards killed many of the remaining prisoners deemed too ill to walk and left their corpses lying in the open. It is estimated that more than 6 million Jews and other innocents were murdered in concentration camps.
We went into the camp, and I went over and looked at these dead people, and there was 1 naked person there. It had 4 bullet holes in the body. Not a drop of blood come out of any of the holes. We went into the camp, and there was bodies stacked up like cordwood all around on the ground, and they had them in flatbed trucks and on trailers. Ohrdruf didn't have the crematories or the gas chambers, so they sent many of their prisoners to Buchenwald, which is just a few miles away. But they did dig huge craters in the ground, and these craters are about the 1/4 of the size of a football field. And they'd throw these bodies in there, and some of them were still alive when they went in, but they were just skin and bones. Anyway, we went in the barracks there. There's hundreds of barracks in this camp. We went in 1 barracks, a couple of us did, and there was 4 shelves on each side of the barracks, and there were prisoners laying on the shelves. Some of them were dead, some of them were diseased, and most all of them were starved. But anyway, we went in these barracks, and the prisoners on the shelves, they'd look up at us and reach up to us. Their eyes were large and their stomachs were swollen, and they had disease, and some of them had lost limbs, and some of them were dead. These barracks were made out of 1-by vertical siding, and you know how wood shrinks after a while. There's about a 1/2 inch crack between each board. So in the summer, these barracks were horribly hot. Then in the winter, they would be terribly cold. These prisoners really suffered. All they had was their pajama-like clothes. They had no straw, they had no mattress. They just laid on these wooden shelves.
News of the imminent German surrender broke in the West on May 8, 1945, and celebrations erupted throughout Europe and parts of the British Empire. In the U.S., Americans awoke to the news and declared May 8th VE Day. The war in Europe was over.
When the war ended, they started shipping the GIs back home. And the way they got to go back home is they had points, like if they had the Purple Heart, they got so many points. If they were married, they got so many points. If they had children, they had points. I didn't have very many points, so I was told to go from my outfit to the Eisenhower headquarters in Frankfurt, Germany, because I knew how to type, and they needed some typists there because the ones that was there had points enough to go home, so they needed replacements. I finally got enough points to come home. We crossed the Atlantic Ocean in the winter. It was December. I bought a case of Milky Way candy bars to eat on the way home, and I never ate one bar. I was sick the whole time. And when we got to Boston Harbor, why, they had a little tugboat shooting these fire hoses up, and they had a big sign that says "Welcome Home" on the tugboat. But when we got into Boston Harbor, we didn't have any receptions. You've seen pictures of the Army coming back and marching down Fifth Avenue, but we just come home and there was nobody there. I got on a train and we come home on a troop train. Before, when the war was on, the troop trains would have priority going through the towns and that. Everybody pulled over for the troop trains. But when we got home, we always pulled over for all the passenger trains. So anyway, we got home to Salt Lake City.
92-year-old Keith Davis cannot escape from the memories World War II has left him with. Surrounded by death and unimaginable suffering each day during the war, somehow Keith and his brothers in arms have managed to put these horrific memories that Churchill called the Black Dog aside and live a full and fruitful life. Keith still speaks about his experiences to school children and civic organizations, reminding them all that freedom isn't free.